In a previous video, we had a look inside the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital just as a method of comparison with the allegations that were made against Lucy Letby in the court case. Now, it was pointed out to me that that's not the neonatal unit as it existed at the time, which is true. But I just did it briefly just to show you what conditions were like on the neonatal unit. However, today we're going to look at a video that very few people have seen, which is a tour of the neonatal unit that was filmed in 2021, and I'm going to talk you all the way through that and provide a commentary on everything that you see on the screen. So the first thing to say about this video is that it appeared in court. It was filmed in September 2021, and we have our dear friends, your friends and mine, the Cheshire Constabulary, to thank for this video, as it was them that produced it. So you can see here we're walking along the corridor in the neonatal unit, and I'm going to stop at various points and just explain to you what the commentator said. So here she said, this is the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester, September 2021. Things have changed a lot as we've moved into our new neonatal unit, but I will show you the rooms. So we will see some indication here of the way that the neonatal unit was laid out at the Countess of Chester around the time of Lucy's alleged crimes. It should be noted that it's not a different building, it's not a different location. These are the rooms that were present in the hospital at that time, and there'll be commentary explaining what you're seeing and what the room was used for at the time and so forth. So at this point the commentator says, things have changed a lot as we've moved into our new neonatal unit, but I will show you the rooms. This is the sluice where all dirty material and equipment is cleaned down. So that's that room there where they clean what they consider to be unclean equipment. Then this is a locker room. I'll just pause again. She said here, this small room here currently houses some lockers and isn't in use, but previously was where the blood gas analyzer was situated. So this was an active room on the unit when Lucy Letby was working at the Countess of Chester. So we're going to move along the corridor. She's probably still saying something at this point, but in a second we'll start moving along the corridor. Here we go. So this not in use room was the kitchen, as you can see. So this was just a staff kitchen. So I'm just going out, this is not really too much to say about this, but obviously I suppose I should mention, staff will be in and out of the kitchen, etc., and then going back onto the unit. Now you will see as the video unfolds how compact this unit is and how there isn't an enormous amount of space between the various rooms. There are a couple of time shifts, so I wouldn't claim that this is all in one complex right next to each other, but because it is very clear this is not like an enormous space with vast amounts of space between everything on the unit, which of course is not what you would expect anyway. So this is the kitchen, and then she goes back into the corridor. Obviously some information boards and notice boards, and then she's going to go into the next room in a second. This room here, I don't think she opens the door here because it's locked. But she says, just here by the front door, this is now an office, but it was the rest area for staff. It was also the room that we took parents in to have any discussions. So you can see that parents would have been around this area, and you will see as the video continues the proximity that they're in to various other rooms. Now, obviously, of course, they've just shown you the sluice room. The parents are right next to the sluice room that is kind of an active medical room, for example. But you'll see as we continue how close they would be to other nurseries and units on the neonatal unit as a whole. I mean, I would suggest that this is relatively cramped for a hospital. Certainly my impression is that hospitals that I've stayed in have been more open plan. And possibly the reason for that is that it's a neonatal unit, so it's necessary. It's an emergency unit essentially. People need to be able to access things quickly. I would assume that is the reason that in my estimation it's more cramped than previous hospitals that I've been in anyway. I'd be interested to see what people say in the comments, but it does seem to me like quite a relatively small unit. She just made some comments here about the information boards that just have information for staff and parents, not terribly interesting. Then she's going to go into the next room. So this is just a linen closet where blankets and sheets were kept, and clothes and what she describes as hats for babies. So not particularly important, but again, something that would have been used quite regularly. So we're now going to move on a little bit further. So what she's saying here, actually, is that through this entrance here, she's pointing to the swipe card operator. This is access to the labour ward, and this is only swipe card access, so you have to have pre-authorised access to get through this area. So parents wouldn't necessarily be able to go through there. That's not part of the neonatal unit. That's the labour ward, the separate units. As we know, there were problems on this unit because nurses were covering more than one unit at once. They were covering maternity unit and they were covering the neonatal unit. I'm not sure whether the labour ward is the maternity unit. Someone that it sounds like it could be, but I wouldn't like to say that confidently because I could turn out to be wrong. But people with nursing qualifications, medics, people who worked in hospitals, they might like to indicate whether the labour ward and the maternity unit are the same thing. It certainly sounds like it to me, and that it would be logical. So when we've heard in the court case about swipe cards, this is the swipe card data that they're referring to, these swipe cards. And you will see in the rest of the video how little swipe card access is actually relevant in anything that's said. And I would assume that that was representative of what occurred on the unit at the time. Of course, we know there's a nursery that didn't have a swipe card entry at all. That's been in the Guardian newspaper. Michelle Warden spoke about that. That's known to be the case. Undeniable. But as we continue, you can see how much swiping goes on, if any. So she's going to continue towards the nurseries now. So this is the first nursery we've encountered, and this is kind of where some of the more interesting stuff in the video begins. So she says, I'll just pause here, this used to be a nursery. It was also referred to as the hot room, and the reason for that is it's because this is where the sickest patients were brought. Typically this room would have had 4 incubators, and you can see the lines of plugs and ports for the gases. So I'll just advance the video. These are the ports and they're required for the equipment that's used on the neonatal unit. Any baby who was incubated or needed CPAP support, just to remind you, that's a form of ventilation. Is it continuous positive airway pressure, possibly? I probably got that acronym wrong because I haven't got it in front of me, but it's a form of ventilation anyway. Would be brought into this room, and they wouldn't typically leave this room until they were more stable. So if we have a look around this room, first thing to note as we entered the room is that, as I mentioned in previous videos, the nurse will always have her back to the entrance. So you can see there's windows here. If we go a bit further along, she mentions a bit about there's always been a computer in this area, and just behind that there was a workbench. There's always been a workbench over there with a phone and a fridge. Those shelves there we used to house guidelines and protocols in folders. So that's not particularly relevant, but you just see some washing facilities and so forth. And this is essentially 2 rooms joined into one because they have a computer room over there, but it's still the same room. And this is the only... There is frosted glass there. So I wanted to address this assertion that there was frosted glass. So there is actually frosted glass on the door there, it would appear. As you can see, there's a window that you can just see straight through. There's another window there that's blocked up, but there is a clear window. As it continues, you will see in a second, as they begin to scroll around the room, she's saying here, with regard to this, she's saying this is the area where the drugs were kept. As you can see, they're all in locked cupboards, emptied now. This was the controlled drug cupboard. There is a separate entrance to the room. So I'll discuss that in a second. But firstly, we'll just go over to here. And again, you can see here, she's mentioning about some other equipment there. You can see, let's just rewind a little bit. You can see here that there appears to be frosted glass there, but there's a double window looking straight into the room. The thing is that nurses could have entered this room, this nursery, at any moment. You've seen the proximity to communal areas of the hospital. It's literally, 10 yards away, 5 yards away? It's a matter of yards away from these communal areas. There's a lot of people working on neonatal unit. Even at night, there's a lot of people working on them. But remember that the crimes and incidents supposedly followed Lucy from nighttime to daytime. So at daytime, there's definitely a lot of people around. And, supposedly she still managed to conduct all of these acts without being detected. You can see she would have had to have her back to the door. She would have had to have her back to the windows. There's clear windows looking into the room. And I must emphasise, they're saying this was the nursery. This was the nursery on the neonatal unit, Nursery 1, the hot room as it was described. And I think this might have been the nursery that Michelle Warden referenced that doesn't have a swipe card entrance. But I couldn't say definitively, again, without having the information in front of me. But you can see, if you're going to carry out some pretty involved crimes on numerous occasions in this type of room, you're going to have to do it pretty quickly, and you're going to have to be taking a lot of risks on a busy unit because there's people coming out all the time, and they're right, and you're not even facing them. It's not like you can see, there's someone coming down the corridor, I better stop. You don't even know. And the way that this was presented in court, as we'll continue, it's always like, everyone was off in a nursery, so Lucy could easily just, as if it's some sort of palatial space and they were off in the West Wing. In fact, it's strange in a way that they showed this in court because this damages the prosecution case. But we'll get onto that more as the video continues. I just wanted to mention as well that there are a few references in this video, and one has just been made, to locked cupboards and locked fridges. That really begs the question of why they didn't do anything regarding the insulin, and considering that insulin had already been used in supposed serial killer cases, some of them perhaps genuine, some of them that I don't believe to be genuine, as a form of poison. There's no reason that people on the unit would believe those people to be innocent unless they knew the case inside out, which is doubtful. So considering there'd already been people convicted for insulin poisonings, why wasn't insulin in a controlled location? Why wasn't it locked away? Because then you could have said definitively, well, there wasn't any insulin missing. So that probably would have cleared Lucy immediately. Like in other cases where people are convicted, the prosecution attempted to put together some claim that insulin was missing. That wasn't even something the prosecution attempted to do in this court case. All they did was say, well, probably there was insulin and probably there was bags and probably this happened and probably that happened. It was obviously entirely hypothetical. There was no attempt to say Lucy accessed the insulin at this point. There was insulin missing. Lucy was the only person who could have done it. Not at all. And simply if the fridge was locked and they had registers and audits of what was happening, you probably would have never heard my voice because there probably would never have been a court case. But I also at this point want to remind you of something and then just ask you to consider a few things. So please remember, this isn't a new building. These are the rooms that were on the neonatal unit in 2015 and 2016. That's why it was filmed for court in September 2021 and presented to the court during the court case. Secondly, I want you to have a think about the likelihood of some of the allegations against Lucy Letby based on what you've seen physically. So I'll even rewind the video so we can just go over it again. So here we are in the corridor. You've seen how close we are. We're just yards away from communal areas, other rooms, other nurses milling around. There's even an entry to a different unit there. And then we go straight from there, straight from this swipe card exit entrance. Don't think there's a swipe card on this room. It's a key code door. So this is probably the nursery that didn't have a swipe card. So they go straight in there. As you can see, you'd have to have the back to the entrance. There is frosted glass there, it would appear. I still think you can see in through that. But anyway, there's a double window. And then I want you to think about the allegations that Lucy Letby that were levelled at her, that I obviously don't believe that she did. So she needed to remove wrappers on syringes. She needed to engage in these attacks against infants with air without ever knowing who was behind her or who could come into the room. She supposedly fished a paper towel out of a confidential waste bin at some point. How would she do that? It's not even easy. It's not. I mean, people have said it's not even feasible to fish a paper towel out of a confidential. You'd have to get into the confidential waste bin, somehow remove the top of it because you can't just reach inside. Identify the supposed paper towel because you're not just taking out any paper towel. It's supposed to be one that you've treasured, although she stuck it under a bed in a Morrison's carrier bag. You've got to do all this. Well, if anyone catches you, if anyone sees you, what the hell are you doing, Lucy? Why the hell have you taken the top off the... You know, that's another thing she's supposed to have done. In these incredibly cramped conditions where there's people around all the time, she's used these very arcane methods of murder. She's supposed... In one case, she's supposed to have hung around doing nothing for an hour while the infant supposedly started to bleed to death. Then she raised the alarm for some reason. All this... How is she going to do that for an hour? Just stood there while the baby's bleeding to death, just like looking at the baby, and no one's seen anything. The risk is enormous. And bear in mind, in that case, she's already supposedly been successful with air. She's already supposedly killed babies with air. But in that case, she just decides to get a bit innovative and use a tool. Was it a nasogastric tube? Oh no, it can't have been a nasogastric tube, Dowie decides. There's no nasogastric tubes on the unit. Oh, probably it's some other object. It's probably some other object. Yeah, what she would have done was, she would have stuffed that down the baby's throat, then just stood around for an hour while it bled to death, and then raised the alarm. Yeah, I mean, that's likely, isn't it? And then she supposedly engaged in liver damage against an infant. The argument about nighttime is nonsense, because there are many other people on the unit. You would never know who was coming in behind you, but then she's also conducted many of these supposed acts during the day. All it needs is for you to be seen once. There's windows there, there's windows later, and we're going to see it on the left hand side of the room. There's more windows, there's windows in the room we just come out of, there's 2 doors into the room, there's an entrance you can't even see. All you've got to do is for someone to see something once, and as we know, you're in prison for the rest of your life. And bear in mind, she's supposed to have coordinated, I believe, it's 24 separate attacks in this cramped unit, even during the daytime when there are dozens of people working there, without being seen. That's why when I've spoken to neonatal nurses, they've just said it's laughable. There's absolutely no chance. This is honestly, for me, one of the strongest arguments against Lucy's guilt. It's just simply the fact that no one has seen her doing anything on a unit such as this when the logistics are so difficult. Even before you go into the science, there needs to be, the proof is, oh look, we've put together this shoddy rotor chart that has absolutely no merit whatsoever, in which there are loads of collapses that she wasn't present for, and we've moved stuff around, and we know for a fact she wasn't there. Other times she wasn't the designated nurse, she wasn't even in the room. There's people around her all the time, even according to the prosecution case. But hey, we've managed to kind of fiddle something around a bit so that Lucy's possibly on duty, and she probably started injecting air into people. I mean, no way, even on that level, is this proven beyond reasonable doubt. That's before you go into the science, the absolute shit that was put in the case by Dowie Evans. So I do think it's very important to look at this and just ask yourself, practically speaking, logistically speaking, realistically, has Lucy Letby engaged in 24 attacks on infants on this neonatal unit that is like 10 to 20 yards long and there's people around all the time? I'll leave you to ponder that as we continue the video. So we're going to move on a little bit here. So she's still explaining some stuff about the room. So I'll just wind forward a little bit until she comes out. She's talking about the cupboards and stuff. So here she's saying this just brings you out further along into the neonatal units. And she says here there's a small room here. I can't remember the function of it, but there wasn't anything particularly important at the time. So she's just explaining about that room before we move on to the next room on the neonatal unit, which is this room here. And she's saying here, I'll just pause once we can see into this room. This room we called the treatment room, but actually no treatment went on in this room. That does rather beg the question of why it was called the treatment room. It was more a storage area. We had stack of systems around the room with all the different equipment that we needed, all our disposables. Also, we kept the stair ventilators and CPAP machines in this area. So that wouldn't be a nursery, that was just a storage room, essentially. But you can see there's a lot of equipment in there. Not one of the more kind of relevant rooms in this tour. But again, you can see easily a nurse can be coming, they could need to from the storeroom. You see how close they would be to the nursery where Lucy's supposedly standing over an infant for an hour doing nothing. So that she'll continue down the corridor in a second. Here we go. Oh, something important I missed. When she's doing this hand movement here, she's saying, here there was a lockable fridge that's obviously been moved now. So again, they had a lockable fridge on the unit. Now, I don't know anything about the storage conditions for insulin. In my understanding, it's kept in a fridge. So why wasn't it kept in a lockable fridge? Why didn't they have a proper audit of the insulin on the unit so that if something happened, they would know how much was missing? And, you know, it needs to be accountable. I mean, anyone, not just in the case of a murder. Obviously, that's an extreme situation, but someone could just take some or all of the insulin off the unit and then sell it, for example. How would you ever know if you're not keeping tabs on it? So I find it extraordinary that they had lockable equipment on the unit, but according to what we heard in the court case, the insulin was just readily accessible, and there wasn't even the slightest attempt from the prosecution to prove that anything was missing because they couldn't prove that. They couldn't even provide any evidence for it because there wasn't any. I personally find that another extraordinary aspect of this court case, but there's so many by this point, and hospital I should say, there's so many by this point, you know, we're used to it, I guess. So we're just moving into this area next to where there's the rainbow. She says here, this area housed the ward park's desk. I don't know what that means. Probably means something to someone who works in a hospital. Intended to be the area where the nursing staff congregated, and there was a computer in this area. So not of great importance, but again, you could have nurses working in this area. They would likely, as she said, nurses will congregate. Right, let's stop here. So this is Nursery 2. Firstly, we're seeing the same pattern again. You would have to have your back to the corridor. You see how close the corridor is to this unit. You see that there's a wide open glass window there. You also seen we're literally right next to the area that is intended to be where the nursing staff congregated. And this was a significant nursery in the court case, Nursery 2. This housed 4 cots and sometimes 3. And she says, you can see that the sink is over in this corner. Previously, it was in the corner by the front door. Obviously, we're not looking at the sink. This is where the cots would have been located at the time. Another thing, there's a window leading into the nursery. Now, I know there are blinds, and it's possible that you could... I think there are also blinds on the windows, the other side of the unit. But I think if someone was going around pulling the blinds down and then babies were dying, I think people would start to... That's when suspicions would have been raised. That's when people would be thinking, why is Lucy pulling the blinds down all the time and then the babies are dying? That would be the kind of thing that would raise suspicions. Of course, we know from the Thurl inquiry no nurses had suspicions and there's never been any reference to any blinds being lowered. But I just wanted to point out there's also a window outside. So we've got windows on both sides of this room, just as we had in the previous unit. You've got your back to the unit. It's literally next to an area where the nurses are supposed to be congregating. But don't worry, there's plenty of time to just commit whatever crimes you need without anyone noticing. It's not a problem. I will say as well, there's no evidence of frosted glass in this room. I don't see any conceivable reason to have a lot of frosted glass in a hospital, and there's none in this room at all, as far as I can see. She's talking here about cupboards housing small bits of equipment such as tape measures, some gauze, some cotton wool, other things to help with feeding, no medication. You can see these cupboards weren't locked. So that again implies, once again, medication should be kept in locked cupboards. I mean, that's pretty standard, is it not? Not just in hospitals, but just more broadly speaking, to have medication cupboards that are locked. So she's making a clear demarcation there between a non-medical cupboard and a medical cupboard, and saying that these didn't have locks on them. Not that they used the locks, seemingly, for anything on the unit. Although they had the provision to lock things, they just didn't bother, seemingly. So we're going to move on past the rainbow sign here, and we're going to move on to the next nursery. So this is nursery 3. So the first thing I want you to know here is, look at the proximity between nursery 2 and nursery 3. So when we observe the court case, and when we hear the transcripts, and when we hear the brilliant Nick Johnson spouting his nonsense, we often hear, oh, nurses were in other rooms. But in actual fact, often they're no more than a few feet away, quite aside from how close they are to the corridors. And had Lucy actually committed these supposed crimes, she would always have her back to the corridor. Literally, she has no clue who is going to come in or go past. Again, this is another room where there are windows to the outside as well, so people could clearly walk past and notice something. But obviously a more pressing concern is that you're right next to the congregation area for nurses. There's wide open windows, there's wide open doors, and you're right next to the other nursery. They could just come in and out in a matter of seconds. So the narrator says here, this is nursery 3, again, a similar room to nursery 2. As the babies became older and more stable, they would graduate through the rooms. So that's an interesting detail that I didn't know. So nursery 1 is the most intense room. It's like the kind of the reverse of the level 3, level 2, level 1 neonatal units. So level 1 is for the sickest babies who are struggling. Nursery 2, they're recovering a little bit, slightly less serious perhaps, or maybe if they can't house babies in nursery 1 for some reason, and here they're graduating, this means they're getting better. She also says typically this room would have 3, perhaps 4 cots, almost exactly the same layout as nursery 2. So I've kind of commented on everything in this room. It's all the same stuff as the previous room. There's an open window, there's an open door, you can see right into the room, etc, etc. So leaving aside that issue, of course, they're all so close to the corridor. So we're going to move on to the next room now. So there's a bit of a time freeze here as they move on. And she says this is one of the exits from the units. If you go through these doors, these stairs take you up to the back door of the postnatal ward. And they're going to move on further in a second to this room. So I think they might be in a slightly different area of the hospital here because there was a time shift. So it's difficult to say specifically where they are in the hospital relative to where they were previously. We're on the last couple of minutes of the video now, but this room next to the zebra here, this is a room where parents would make milk feeds for their babies and prepare their breast milk. So again, you see parents are on the unit, they're around all the time, as we know from the court proceedings. So we continue down the corridor here. I believe they're going to go through these doors in a second. She's just saying something about the cupboards. It's not particularly interesting, really. And she mentions another room that was a manager's office where the deputy manager and the practice development nurse would work. This is another small office that had... Oh no, she's going to go down the corridor now. This is apparently where the transport incubator was located and stored. I think she's explaining there that you can exit the neonatal unit. None of this is particularly interesting. We're just going to wait until we go into the final room in a second. I think this is where she's explaining about the room near the zebra. So this is where the parents would mix their breast milk and so forth. I don't know why she said parents. It's going to be the mother who's mixing the breast milk. One would assume. But I I suppose the father could do it. And then we're just going to go a bit further down the corridor. I think this is where the incubator was stored, in fact, until we get to the final room. And so in this room here, this is, you can see, is another communal, it's now a communal area, but this was an equipment room and an area where breast milk was stored. Through these double doors is their parents' accommodation, which is 2 double rooms with ensuite bathrooms and a kitchen with a lounge area. So obviously, as we know, parents are sleeping on the neonatal unit at times if their baby is in a difficult position. So that's what, I mean, how much sleep they got under those circumstances, one would question. It must be unbelievably traumatic. And they're around all the time. Some of these parents, when they were able to do so, were probably on the neonatal unit more than the staff. So as mentioned, these units are peopled by various people, by nurses, by registrars, by doctors, by parents, pretty much all the time. So she's just mentioning here that this is another storage room. We've seen a similar room to this already. There's another computer in this room, but obviously it's not a medical room in any way. But again, you could have nurses coming in and out of here. It's not an unused room. So we're coming right to the end of this tour now. And she's just showing you another communal area where a couple of things were stored. I think this is right at the end. Yes, it's right the last 20 seconds. I think she was saying that this is another equipment room. So again, this is not particularly a medical room, and this is right at the end of the tour, and she's just going to go out the exit now. So that is the end of the neonatal unit tour, and I'm now going to present my conclusions on this tour. So there are a few points that I'd like to make in conclusion. The first one is that this is a very compact unit. Even the adjacent nurseries are located very close together. There are windows and doors all over the place. I don't see any evidence that there was lots of frosted glass, and this makes very little sense anyway. But we can see that there's clear glass used in the majority of windows and doors, if not all of them. Nurses will always have their backs to the corridors. We've seen as well how close the corridors are to the rooms, as you would expect. There are lots of people working on the unit, even at night. Anyone could walk in at any moment. Please think about the nature of the allegations and all the logistics involved, and whether that could be done without detection. We know that there were nurses, doctors and parents coming in and out of these units with regularity. Indeed, this is part of the prosecution case. No one denies this, quite the opposite. And then finally, remember that no one saw Lucy Letby do anything untoward. No nurse working on the unit suspected a single thing. We know this from the Thirlwell Inquiry statements. So I'm going to finish this video by quoting a neonatal nurse that I spoke with. I don't always use quotations from my book on the channel because I do want to hold a few things back from my book, but I wanted to use this one because it's so illustrative of what we've seen in this video. So remember, this person is a qualified neonatal nurse. This is their opinion. Neonatal units are busy units. You're not in a nursery on your own. You've got other nurses in there with you. You've got doctors in there. You also have parents working in and out all the time on the unit, even during the night. The idea of being able to do this and go undetected is from Fantasyland, to be honest. The likelihood is non-existent. And I won't add anything to that statement. Finally, if I could just request that if you've enjoyed this video, if you could subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already. It helps the visibility of the channel on YouTube and helps me a great deal as well. I'm extraordinarily grateful for what I've already received. To be over 2,000 subscribers is incredible. I've only been doing the channel for 4 months and it's been accelerating recently. So I'm really grateful for that, and hopefully, we're helping raise awareness of this case and spreading the word regarding what I believe to be this egregious miscarriage of justice of Lucy Letby, regarding Lucy Letby. So just say in conclusion, if you have any comments, queries, observations about this video, I always enjoy reading your comments and I'll look forward to reading them.